Okay, thank you very much to the chair. I also have to apologize on my side. Just 10 minutes ago, they started cutting trees across the street, so that might cause some disturbance. But okay, let's see how it goes. So in the next 20 minutes, I'll talk about core case marking across a group of Tibeto-Burman languages, the so-called San languages. This talk is a report on a pilot survey on case marking across San languages, um, in which I assessed the feasibility of a larger scale study. I'm open to hearing your comments and questions, which can help me develop this project further. Just a second. Okay. So, to start off, mainland Southeast Asia is a well-known example of a Sprachbund. Another term used for that is linguistic area convergence zone or diffusion zone. I will use the term Sprachbund here. And the core of mainland Southeast Asia Sprachbund is often described as consisting of the four countries Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, and Thailand, and parts of a fifth country, which is Myanmar, though it's usually not specified which parts of Myanmar. The linguistic features that are considered typical of the mainland Southeast Asia Sprachbund show clear isogloss boundaries that set the area apart from what lies to the north and the west, but the southeast boundary is not that clear. Many features are shared with languages in what we can call insular Southeast Asia. So coming back to case marking. Languages of the core mainland Southeast Asia Sprachbund tend to lack inflectional morphology, such as case marking. But languages in the western periphery or to the west of the mainland Southeast Asia Sprachbund often do exhibit inflectional morphology, including case marking. The Sal languages, which are the subject of the current study, fall under the Tibeto-Burman family, and the mainland Southeast Asia Sprachbund cuts right through the Tibeto-Burman family, with the majority of the Tibeto-Burman languages falling outside of the Sprachbund and a minority falling inside it. So the Sal languages fall west of the Sprachbund, the area where we find a higher occurrence of inflectional morphology, including case marking. It may be interesting to point out that a correlation is found between what we call basic word order and case marking. So there is a correlation between having SOV order with presence of case marking. So now, while SVO is considered a feature of the mainland Southeast Asia Sprachbund, the majority of Tibeto-Burman languages show SOV, verb final order. The Sal languages belong to this majority that shows SOV order. So, as far as I am aware, Grison was the first to recognize that the Sal languages as a group, be it under a different name, namely Bodo, Naga, Cochin. The term Sal was coined by Berling and refers to a shared root for sun among these languages, which is Sal. Opinions differ as to the sturdiness of this grouping. While some have found lexical and morphological evidence to support Sal as a node in the Sino-Tibetan family, others consider the grouping provisional at best, even to this day. They question whether the evidence truly shows shared innovation rather than shared retention. Within the provisional or not Sal grouping, we find further subgroups, namely Borogaro, Northern Naga, Jingpo Asakian, and Peterson suggests that to this list we may want to add Mrukongso. Of these, the Borogaro and Northern Naga the Borogaro and Northern Naga subgroups seem to be the most closely related. Okay. Previous research. There have been several studies on case marking in individual Sal languages, which I gratefully use as resources for this survey. And there have been studies on sets of Tibeto-Burman languages in relation to case. The most important study to mention here, though, is the impressive survey on case by Lapola on a whopping 150 Tibeto-Burman languages. And this research was published in 1995. This study included 15 Sal languages. There is another publication by Lapola in 2004, which increases the sample to 170 languages, but I cannot find a list of the languages included, so I don't know exactly how many Sal languages are included in there. So this pilot study survey aims to prepare the way for a survey on case marking across SAL languages with the following goals. The first goal is to provide a finer grained image of differences and similarities between case marking systems across the SAL group by surveying a large sample of SAL languages. So in order to attain that objective, we need to include substantially more than 15 languages to make a difference with previous surveys. A second goal is to update the image we currently have of case marking across the SAL group by including publications from the last 2 or 3 decades. For quite a few of the SAL languages, for a long time, all we had as linguists were the precious but rather limited notes by government work on these languages. A great development in the past decades is that we are seeing more descriptive linguistic work being published on Tibeto-Burman languages from this area. The third goal is to, where possible, increase the reliability of the results of the survey by checking claims on case marking against all annotated sentences and all annotated text included in the sources. So this presentation itself reports on the results of a pilot study on case marking across the SAL languages, and the aims of this pilot are as following. The first aim is to assess the range of variation in case marking systems within this group. By having an approximate idea of the range of variation, I can revise my survey form in such a way that it captures the range of possibilities well. The second aim is to identify issues that come up. For example, I set off on this investigation with a set of premises, right? But as I am conducting the survey, I may find out that a particular linguistic label works well for many languages, but not all. So how cross-linguistically valid are the terms that I'm using? Based on issues that come up during the interaction with data sources, premises may need to be revised or amended and the survey form updated. The third aim is to assess the feasibility of the objectives of the full survey. So I will discuss each of these points, but first let's have a quick look at the methods and premises of this study. So the pilot study is a variety survey, a survey aimed at exploring the range of variation that occurs in the marking systems of the SAL group. Additionally, it is a convenience sample. I've chosen languages for which grammatical descriptions are readily available. The data sources used for this pilot, and these are also the types of sources that I will use for the full survey, are descriptive grammars of SAL languages, articles or book chapters on case marking in specific SAL languages, and articles or book chapters on SAL languages that focus on other aspects of language but do also contain information on case marking. So what you see on this slide is a selection of premises that are relevant to the survey form I'm using and to our discussion today. First, core case marking is defined as case marking of SAP arguments. The S argument being the single argument of an intransitive clause, A argument, the agent-like argument of the transitive clause, and P argument, the patient-like argument of a transitive clause. I follow a broad definition of case in the sense that these markers need not necessarily be bound elements. A narrow definition of case marking would consider only bound case markers as true case markers. Among Tibeto-Burman languages, we often find case clitics or even postpositions, though sometimes it may be difficult to determine whether we are dealing with a clitic or an adposition. So a second premise is that these SAP roles are universal. That is, they are relevant to every language, natural language. Third premise that we must distinguish between syntactically based case marking and semantically based case marking. Languages with case marking often have a combination of the two, where core cases are expressed syntactically and peripheral cases are semantically based. Sometimes even the case marking of the SAP arguments is semantically based. If that is the case, Dixon and Blake argue, we should not be using the terms nominative, accusative, and ergative, absolutive. Okay, so let's get back to the aims of this pilot study on case markers across SAL languages. The first aim was to assess the range of variation. So what we find within this group of related languages is 3 different alignment systems. The first system is where the S and A arguments are treated the same, and the P argument is treated differently from S and A arguments. So this is known as nominative accusative alignment. Example of a SAL language that shows this alignment is Atom, a Borogaro language. All the Bodo languages, by the way, that are included in this pilot showed nominative accusative alignment. The second system is where the S&P arguments are treated the same and the A argument is treated differently from the S&P arguments. This is known as ergative-absolutive alignment. An example of a language in the pilot sample that shows ergative-absolutive alignment is Muklon, which is a Northern Naga language. Of the Northern Naga languages included in the pilot sample, one showed ergative-absolutive alignment and one showed semantically based case marking, which we will get into later. So when we look at the first system, so the languages that follow a nominative accusative system, we see that most languages only mark the P argument and leave the A and S arguments unmarked for case. This is the most frequent pattern of marking nominative accusative systems across the world, by the way. Minority of languages has a nominative marker on top of having an accusative marker. Examples of this in the pilot sample are Boro and Garo. The nominative marker in Boro and Garo, by the way, is not present on all A and S arguments, though. The language shows what is known as differential nominative marking. Differential marking is also sometimes called optional or partial marking. So a third type of case marking system that is found in the pilot sample is agentive, non-agentive marking. This is a form of semantically based case marking, also referred to as pragmatic case marking. The S argument takes either agentive or non-agentive marking, or remains unmarked for case, based on semantic or pragmatic factors. Non-agentive cases, a case is also referred to in the literature as anti-ergative or anti-agentive. So an example of a language with an agentive system is Turum, a language that belongs to the Jingpo-Asakian group, but has strong Thai influence. In the figure at the bottom of the slide, you can see that the A argument takes agentive marker, the S argument takes either agentive or non-agentive marking, and the T argument takes non-agentive marking. In Turum, arguments may also be left unmarked for case. So another example of a language with semantically based marking is Nokte, Northern Naga language. The annotated stories and annotated elicited sentences in Rahman 2016 show a fascinating array of possibilities of marking constituents for case. A arguments, if they take case marking, usually take the agentive marking me. However, there was also an example of an A argument taking a non-agentive marking. S arguments, if marked, usually took non-agentive P, but there was also an example of an S argument taking the agentive marking me. The P arguments took no agentive marking, but if marked, the P argument took a non-agentive marking or dative, allative, locative. So here's an example of how patients are marked for case in Nokte. All four examples contain what is typically considered the verb with highly affected patients. The data are taken from Rahman 2016, but classes have been adapted. So in class 1, they wanted to kill a deer. The patient deer is unmarked for case. In class 2, John killed the snake with a stick. The patient snake is marked with non-agentive case. In class 3, she will hit the girl. The patient girl is marked with dative, allative, locative case. The fourth sentence, she hit the dog with a stick. The patient dog is marked with allative, locative case. Here we can ask the question, which of the arguments in bold on this slide count as P arguments in Nokte? Or in other words, which of these clauses are transitive and which are not? It seems clear that the mark there in clause 1 is the P argument of shoot, and that the non-agentive marked snake in clause 2 is the P argument of the serial verb constructor kill, hit. What are the red and yellow constituents in clauses 3 and 4 also P arguments? I think the answer to answer this question, we should look at how patients marked with Nang and Ko are treated. Is it the same as non-agentive and unmarked patients? or different? For example, what patterning does the verb morphology show? It would also be interesting to see what meaning differences there are between clauses that have different case markers on the thematic role of patient. The current English translations don't reveal a lot of difference. In fact, none. Okay, coming back to the aims. The second aim of this pilot study was to identify issues in carrying out a survey on case marking across sign languages. A first issue that came up was that the discussion of case systems in some sources does not align with what what example sentences or annotated texts show. This is an issue one can expect to encounter working with older sources. For example, Muklum, a Northern Naga language, was described as having nominative accusative cases by Dasgupta in 1980. This is incorrect. This can already be deducted from the example sentences that Dasgupta himself provides. Muklum has ergative absolutive alignment. Lapolla, in his 1995 survey of case marking, notices this already, and in my dissertation on Muklum, I provide further supporting evidence for this. But a mismatch may also happen with more recent resources. For example, it may be difficult for linguists to distinguish between an ergative absolutive system and a semantically based case system like agentive, non-agentive case marking, especially when the data set is relatively small. To conclude, extracting case markers from sources is relatively easy, but reliably confirming alignment type takes more effort. The occurrence of mismatches between proposed analysis and example sentences and appended text raises a second issue, which is that ideally we should be able to check a proposed analysis of case marking against annotated text, or at least annotated example sentences. However, not all sources append annotated text, of course. In fact, sources that do are a minority in my current collection of sources. Primary sources also do not contain annotated example sentences. This is not strange for a secondary source, but for a primary source, this is a little bit unusual. And I think such primary sources should be avoided in a survey like this. Then checking a proposed analysis of case marking for a language against annotated text that of that language. It can be difficult if that language shows frequent zero anaphora. An example of such a language is Muglom. So in my dissertation, I claimed that ergative marking is systematic on A arguments in Muglom. It is relatively easy to check this in elicited sentences, but ideally we would want to include textual data in the testing as well. The problem here is that overt A arguments are very rare in texts. Listeners infer the A argument from a complex person agreement on the verb and from the discourse context. This is the reason why even I myself don't fully trust my own analysis of ergative case in Muklum being non-differential. In fact, I know there is one corner of the language where either ergative case marking or a lack of case marking occurs, and this is with direct quotations. When there is I will give you an example of this. So here you can see two example sentences of direct quotation in Muklum. In both, you can see in the first position the speaker in bold. In sentence 5, it is in red, and in sentence 6 in black. What follows is the direct quote, which is then closed off with a quotative marker ta. In the first sentence, you see that the speaker who is being quoted is marked with the ergative clitic while the speaker in bold in sentence 6 remains unmarked for case. Okay. So another issue regards one of the premises I mentioned earlier, the cross-linguistic validity of SAP. Are SAP meaningful labels for every language? Van Breugel, in 2014, does not think so for Atong, a nominative accusative language. He proposes that Atong has SNA, but not a distinct P argument. P argument. So instead, he proposes a broader E argument. And for languages with semantically based case marking, using the language's SAP feels somewhat artificial. However, for typological or cross-linguistic comparison purposes, these labels seem helpful. So we'll continue to use these labels. So one of them, so let's see. Give me just a second. Yeah. So for reasons of time, I will skip to the conclusion. So a third aim of this pilot was to assess the feasibility of attaining the objectives of the full survey on core case marking, and this will be the concluding topic of this presentation. The first objective of a full survey of case marking across SAL languages is to create a finer grade image of case marking systems across the SAL languages, and this seems feasible. There are enough sources available to compile a sample that is considerably larger than 15. The second objective is to update the picture we have of case marking across SAL, and this is definitely feasible, seeing the publications that have come out in the past 2 or 3 decades, like grammatical descriptions in the form of master theses and PhD dissertations and journal articles that discuss or provide information on case marking, in particular SAL languages. The quality of publications, however, should be checked before including them in a survey like this. The third objective is to increase the reliability of determining the function of case markers and thereby the alignment type of the case system by checking proposed analysis against example sentences and texts. Now, this one is a difficult one, because this seemed only possible in a limited manner. Because to check analysis, we ideally need a large corpus of annotated text, which of course only very few sources will include. So what to do with this aim of increased reliability of determining alignment systems? I could include only sources that include a large corpus of annotated text, but that will make my sample very small and will not allow me to create a finer grained picture of case marking across the SAL languages. Or I could just let go entirely of this aim and include whatever language I can find a resource on. Or third option, I can find a spot somewhere in the middle where I give priority to finding sources with more annotated sentences and text against which hypotheses can be checked, but not a priori exclude all languages for which fewer annotated sentences or texts are available. So these are my conclusions. I hope that my research will contribute to the knowledge we have of the differences and similarities across the SAL group, whether the SAL group as a genetic classification will stand or not. And that it may add another data point to the list of features that will eventually help us to confirm or reject subgroupings based on shared innovations. With that thought, I would like to conclude the presentation. I would love to hear your ideas, comments, or questions that you have now. I'm not physically present at the conference, so we cannot have a chat over lunch or tea, but you are welcome to shoot me an email instead if you would like to discuss anything related to this talk. And I would now like to give the word back to the chair of our meeting. Thank you very much.